Sal. Shame, shame, shame on you, my friend, for misrepresenting science so egregiously. Folks, I have been planning tonight's impromptu expose on Sal for your viewing pleasure. But as I am the fastest rising star in the entire counter-apologetics community, I am grossly in sync, in lockstep, so to speak, with the will of the people in this entire industry. And so it just so happened that my broadcast tonight overlaps with Sal's live debate against T-Jump. How about them apples? But folks, let's get a couple of things clear. I have not been invited to debate Sal tonight. On top of that, I am far more entertaining than T-Jump, amen, hallelujah.
Victory, 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 victory.
And I will not stop until I have victory, 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 victory. And since Sal is too scared to challenge the United States champion to a one-on-one encounter himself, consider the champion challenging you right here, right now. I will not stand for being dodged. If you were going to talk shit about evolutionary biology on the internet, you need to bring that motherfucking nonsense to an evolutionary biologist. But no, you'd rather debate T-Jump's chair. And then you use that nonsense to counter-apologize, to counter-program the most important counter-apologetics show all week and weekend long, that, of course, being late-night counter-apologetics. Sal, I will not stand for this. Consider yourself my next victim. And if you want to do something about it, I dare you to try. Because you are going to have to kill me before you can beat me for this United States championship. And in the meantime, I will whoop your ass every single time all over the goddamn internet. I am calling you out. Let's see you do something about it. It's time to start the goddamn show. The champ is here, and I am on fire.
Hello, welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I hope you were entertained by the jetpack and the music and the paragliding. I thought that was so cool with the hang on with the paragliding. I was wondering how he's able to get those shots, and I found out they have this thing called a selfie, and a quote-unquote invisible selfie stick. So he actually has a stick to help the selfie, but then the software kind of erases the stick. And then also that particular, it's a special called a 360 camera, X1 and X2, that can actually automatically kind of do little bits of zoom and then kind of rotate. So those are just spectacular shots. Now, this morning, I found out about that video with this Pocket Locker 86, Jay Bundy. And I just thought that was really entertaining. So I hope you enjoyed that too. Sorry for the vulgarity. He's a character. I'd like to welcome everyone that has come to, that had saw the debate on Modern Day Debate. I'd like to acknowledge James for organizing it. I got recruited at the last moment. People wondering how come I'm being, how my partners are chosen. What usually ends up happening is someone wants to debate, maybe a creationist is selected, and it's like, well, who's going to fill in? Who's going to be who's going to be a partner of who? And it's always old reliable Sal that they'll pick. And I finally said, James, don't you think I could do a one-on-one at some point? Don't you think I've kind of earned the right to do that? So that's kind of what's going on. My last debate was kind of hard, and so what'll usually end up happening is the other side will say, well, I don't really, they prefer not to be engaging me, and they'll engage the other party, and that just kind of maintains it. And unless I try to be a little bit rude to interrupt, I usually don't get a word. And I could actually just sit there and never say anything because of the way it will go. So that's just kind of explaining what's going on. It is still a good experience to see and to hear what kind of arguments are still made on my side. So let me acknowledge everyone here, especially the new people. But Schnoil, it's great to see you. Godzilla Freak. Stephen Mulrooney, we don't see each other much, but thank you. And Aloysia, it's always great to see you. Diamond S, I don't know we've ever made the acquaintance. That the name sounds familiar. Welcome. And then Pilgrim Processing, yes, that Worldwide Wrestling. Yeah, I guess that was his invitation. It was pretty good, I think. Matt's great to see you, brother. If I miss someone, sincere apologies in advance. I'm just going through this. There was someone, Wante, greetings. Thank you for, this is the first time I've seen you and anyone else. So I promised that I was gonna cover some things in the debate. Oh, Ray Giordano, this is like for forever that I've seen you. So I took a lot of notes. Some of you who may watch this also by recording, because I know you'll be watching after MDD, and then you'll see my channel, and then some of you will drop in later. Even though most of the people in the side chat live know who I am, for those recording and also those live that don't know me, my name's Salvador Cordova. That's my real name. I am a molecular biophysics researcher. I used to be a scientist and engineer in the aerospace and defense industry. My mother she was widowed in 2003. I took care of her for 18 years before she went home to be with the Lord in 2021. And I was able to work from home. I got recruited to do biology work, even though I had no formal biology training. I got to work for Dr. John C. Sanford, famous Cornell genetic engineer. His invention, the gene gun, is in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History because it's fed starving billions through genetic improvement. And so that's a little bit about me. Dr. Sanford sent me off to the FAES graduate school at the NIH, and that's where I learned biology. And then I wrote papers and did mostly reporting. I have published in secular venues. I'm pleased to report I'm continuing to publish in secular venues. Probably my most significant publication was Critical of Evolutionary Biology. It is in the Springer Nature reference work on Mathematics and the Arts and Sciences. It's a book that retails for $1,500, but you can get it at the university library shelves. So that's something of my background. I have a MS in Applied Physics from Johns Hopkins University, and I'm claiming an unaccredited MS from the FEAS Graduate School in biology. So that's kind of my background. So in some of these debates, I could tell that I had more specialist knowledge in some of these discussions, and that's sort of what it would take to be able to really dig into some of the questions that were raised. And it's also my opportunity to try to teach creationists kind of the arguments that I think they'll fare better with if they move that way. We have to be able to engage the other side and maybe learn a little bit of the complexity at the cellular and molecular level. You're going to have an easier time rather than arguing the fossil record and maybe some of the more general things. And there's a lot that has changed in the 40 years I've seen the creation evolution controversy kind of evolve over time. A lot has happened, even in like the last year. So much has happened, and I can't quite keep up with it. So, let's see, John Smith, nice meeting you. I don't know we've made the acquaintance. My kids are learning about critical race theory in schools. Should I be concerned? I'm concerned. I complained to the school board. God bless you. Yes, you should be concerned. And thank you for visiting, and especially if you watched the debate. And Cheryl, thank you. I was having audio problems. I always do, and I'm going to keep trying to work around that. Pure Aussie Gold, thank you for joining us, and Danish Debater. So let me see. So I'm just going to go through the notes that I have here. I talked about kind of my background, and I'm a professional creationist researcher. So, professional evolutionary biologists want to debate me, except maybe kind of that nut job who opened the show. I don't know that I want to deal with that. I really, first off, Atheist Junior, Mark Reed, if you're listening, thank you. It was great having you as people on the opposing side. Sincere thanks, especially to Atheist Junior, who was there to support my dear friend Cindy Lincoln, and Mark Reed had similar sympathies. Greetings and honor also to Eric Jewell, who is a Christian brother. He's an old earth creationist. And by the way, glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. This after show is dedicated to him. I believe he is the intelligent designer of all things and the creator God. I lift up prayers for Janet Duttridge, who's a disabled widow, and then some of the needs that were expressed. I think of Arctic Timberwolf. He suffered an eye injury. He's in our prayers and thoughts. We lift up the people in Ukraine who are suffering through a war, and also really the poor Russian soldiers there who probably are in a war that they don't want to be in. May there be peace. And any of you all that are from Ukraine that watch the show, God bless you. You're in my thoughts and prayers. So Mark opened up with the definition of evolution. He said change of heritable characteristics over a generation. Well, yeah, no one's going to disagree that things change. The real question is, what Darwin put forward in Origin of Species, Chapter 6, organs of extreme perfection and complication. Could some of that naturally emerge? So the problem is, we see all these contraptions that humans build, like say a watch, like Paley's watch, you might say. Does that naturally arise, or is it a miracle of God? Darwin tried to put forward a claim that his idea of natural selection would be able to explain the emergence of this naturally, that there was no specific, no special creations, no miracles of God needed, that this is kind of a natural change. And then that's tied to the idea of common ancestry. And I said, oh, grant initially for the sake of argument that there's common ancestry, but you'll need miracles of special creation. What I wasn't able to pull off was showing a clip of Dr. Dan, and let me see if I can actually bring it up now. I don't know if I'm going to be successful. Let me see if I can get this. I want you to hear the clip of Dr. Dan because I quoted it. Let me see here. And some of you heard this before, but I think I would hope it would give some people pause. All right, let me kill my mic and then I'll go to a screen share. Just give you a chance, yeah.
No, but you definitely, it seems like you represented my views very accurately, which is that there is definitely not one single common ancestor protein that every protein that we see is descended from. You have multiple independent things appearing at different times.
And that's an interesting. Just give you a chance, yeah.
No, but you definitely, it seems like you represented my views very accurately, which is that there is definitely not one single common ancestor protein that every protein that we see is descended from. You have multiple independent things appearing at different times.
And that's an interesting. Sorry, forgot to unmute. So you heard it there. I just wanted to show there's a problem with common ancestry at the protein parts level. And then I elaborated the problems. You'd still require miracles for some of these proteins. So I just say, for the sake of argument, let's accept universal common ancestry. Even though I reject it, I'll say you still need miracles. So creationists make the mistake. Do not do this. Do not make common set. Do not show that evidence of common ancestry proves evolutionary theory is true. Show that assume it for the sake of argument first. Don't try to attack it directly because it's very difficult to refute common ancestry. I obviously reject it, but don't, it's a very difficult proof. And I'm just saying, even as a professional, even though I reject it, it's like it's not like a slam dunk case. You have to fight very hard, and even then, many times it's just going to be a draw. So just assume it for the sake of argument, and I just keep seeing the creationists make that mistake. They'll just say they'll attack common ancestry head on, when God's given you practically given you a gift on a silver platter as far as complexity. And I talked about, I could just go on and on about all the complex proteins and systems. Focus on the miracles of God. It says in the Psalms, I'll declare your works. I'll declare your works. Attacking common ancestry is not declaring God's works. I'm not saying it's wrong to attack common ancestry, but if you just describe what God has made and all the systems, you'll have a better argument. Focus on that, and it's going to be stronger. And that, there are a lot of times I have these debate partners. I wish I had time to just pull them aside and said, don't go that way. It's a trap. Declare the works of God, the complexity, and focus on the proteins. And when I started doing that, it's like, the language gets really technical, and it's like, this isn't easy. You need to spend a little time. It says in Proverbs 25:2, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search it out. That means God hides a lot of evidence that you need to dig a little bit deeper to find it. And it's not an easy task. So thank you very much, Claire, for visiting here. This channel definitely has a variety of things on evolutionary theory. That's kind of like, for a while there, that was 100% of the channel. Now, I do have to point out in passing that Atheist Junior threw out this thing about the algae that becomes multicellular. there is this thing called transgenerational plasticity. There are creatures that they can alter between multicellular and single cellular. It's not that it necessarily evolved. It may be natural for it to actually flip back between those forms. And until we have more observation, we can't absolutely say this is the result of natural selection and random mutation. It could be, there's just so much we don't know. And that's just, it may not be what he's saying, that there was macroevolution there. Now, the reverse can happen, definitely by evolution. And I pointed out the canine venereal transmissible tumor. Canine venereal transmissible tumor, something like that. Let me get the name right. There is a new single-celled organism that emerged from a dog. And let me see, canine transmissible venereal tumor. And it was a cancer tumor that emerged in a dog, and then it just kept living and transferring from dog to dog. You don't ever expect that new creature is ever going to evolve back into a dog. It's easy to lose the complexity. It's hard to acquire it. So, you know, I kind of have to question the evidence that Atheist Jr. put on the table, but that was pretty clever on his part. So there is the problem. It's like, what's the best example of, what's the best proof against common ancestry? I'd say if the Earth is young. And I said it's very hard. Evolutionists have said to me that if the Earth is young, like let's say even 1 million or 10,000 years, there's not enough time to evolve all these creatures from a common ancestor. They would have to be specially created. So oh boy, Dr. Dan is here. Speaking of which, Dr. Dan, I showed your picture in my debate. I didn't play the clip because we were having audio issues. So my hero, Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan's an evolutionary biologist, and thank you for dropping in to say hi. And Dr. Dan is my channel among the creationists here. He's like our favorite guy, who's an evolutionary biologist. Most of my channel loves you more than certain other creationists, like who shall not be named, because I'm trying to be polite. So greetings, Dr. Dan. So where was I? Talking about young Earth, not be enough time. But how do you prove young Earth? And I mentioned magnetic fields. I could have mentioned faint young sun paradox and just any number of other things. Some of these do have associated testable predictions with them. This is where you get into astrophysics and a lot of complex stuff. It's too big a hurdle to try to engage right now. So that's why I say don't argue against universal common ancestry. Declare the works of God. Focus on the complexity. Focus on complexity. And why don't, speaking of which, I didn't have a chance to show the Topai Samre's video, but let me show that to you, especially for the new people here that I haven't seen, like Claire. Other people know that I love this example. I have published on it professionally and continue to publish. And so let me see if I could find this. Mr. Jetty is here. Okay, so for those who are new to the channel, let me just introduce a little bit about Topai Samres. Let's see here. Topai Samres is a target of chemotherapies. What happens is in cancer cells, if we can disrupt the function of Topai Samres, this is a rendering of the Topai Samres enzyme, we can kill the cell. So if you don't have Topai Samres, you don't have life, at least as far as human life and probably most life that we know of. So this is one example of the complexity that I wanted to talk about and how difficult it is to evolve it. And that's Joe DeWeese, my colleague. He's a professor of biochemistry at Vanderbilt School of Medicine and also Fried Hardeman. He and I have co-authored papers together like this one in a creationist journal, but he is also published in a top-tier journal, Nature, in 2010. So he's also an excellent secular scientist. And we published recently in the journal, the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. And we will continue to publish. So now let me just show you what the topoisomerase does. You know, the reason I focus on this is it just happens to be the thing that I study. So let me get this going.
Let's consider what happens as DNA unwinds during replication. As DNA unwinds, it acts like this rope when we pull apart its two strands. As you pull the strands apart, twisting tension builds up in the rest of the coiled portion. It is actually adding one twist to the remaining rope for each twist pulled out of it. At some point, you can't separate the strands anymore. The remaining rope is too tightly twisted. If you relax your tension on the rope, it will twist around itself in a supercoil. It is releasing tension. If you want to keep pulling the rope apart, you have to release the tension periodically, and one way to do this is to cut the rope and splice it back together. This problem has been best characterized in small circular DNAs. There are two methods of dealing with this problem in DNA. One cuts only one strand of the DNA double helix, and the other cuts both strands. Let's look at the first. Topoisomerase I enzymes cut a single strand of the double helix, pass the other strand through the cut, and reseal the break, relaxing the overwound molecule, which now has one fewer twist. Topoisomerase II enzymes do the same thing but with both strands of the double helix. Topoisomerase II cuts both strands of a double-stranded DNA and passes another double strand through the break and then reseals the break. So if a molecule of DNA is supercoiled, topoisomerase II can remove the supercoiling, 2 twists at a time, to yield a relaxed circle.
I hope you enjoyed that. And I'd like to welcome my debate partner here, Eric. He says, hi, Evidence and Reasons. It's me, Eric. I was surprised that you actually got something published. Congratulations. Thank you. Oh my goodness, that was hard. And God willing, there are going to be more. Sometimes we don't have to actually just say evolutionary biology is false. We can take topics and elaborate on them, because evolutionary biologists, in honest moments, if you just look carefully, they'll have admissions where they have problems. And this is just grueling work to be going through all those papers. But I could tell you the sentiment is there at the National Institutes of Health. A lot of the medical researchers are like, well, we're not going to criticize common ancestry, but this stuff is just so complicated. We don't believe it can happen naturally. So a lot of them would be like Michael Behe, who accept universal common ancestry, you know, that humans and chimps share an ancestor. They'll accept that. But he'll say, well, but it's still, even if you accept that, you would need intelligent design, or what I would call miracles along the way, to make it happen, because it just violates probability. Boy, I'm seeing a lot of people normally, more than I usually do. So thank you all for joining me. So I just showed the topoisomerase enzyme. And my point in showing this is,
Let's consider what
this is the enzyme, a Richardson ribbon diagram of it. And it does look like scissors, and I alluded to this in my discussion. So I'll slow down a little bit. So you saw how the DNA has to be cut. The way you can untangle it, you can cut it, and then you pass you pass one strand through the other, and you can untangle it, and then you need to reconnect it. I mean, this is not trivial to be able to do that. Just think about how hard this is to just, even if you're doing it with strings and tape, how hard it would be to make a machine that can actually be that sophisticated. So, and I could show you so many more examples of this. Now, it's just saying this is the all or nothing principle. Now, I don't use the word, I try to avoid the word irreducible complexity. Because one, it's an abstraction, and what'll happen is they'll say, you know, Dr. Dan's very smart, and I credit him for that. He's an evolutionary biologist, very smart. Someone was saying irreducible complexity is a problem for evolution. Dr. Dan will find an example of something irreducibly complex that evolved naturally. And he said, well, all the other irreducible complex systems could evolve that way. And I'm just like, see, that's why you don't debate that way. You're opening yourself up for Dr. Dan to be able to use that very effectively. And so I'll just say that's why you don't make these sweeping generalizations. Focus on individual systems like this, and then that will strengthen your case better. And then we could just go protein by protein, example by example. Once you make a generalization like that, you're just going to be slaughtered. You end up when I saw Dr. Dan having Michael B. on his show, 45 minutes were spent on the definition of irreducible complexity and all these supposed exceptions to where it fails. And it's like, oh, see, that's why you don't do stuff like that. Rather than focusing on individual systems and the difficulty of evolving it, you're just having to be pulled apart in all these directions. So now let me see if I have any more slides here that I'd like to show. Even among evolutionary biologists, even among all the topoisomerases, they cannot invoke universal common ancestry there. They're talking about independent ancestry, where it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And that diagram, if it looks ugly, it's because, well, it's not, because it is ugly. It doesn't look like a universal tree. So even at that level, evolutionary biology is having problems unifying the tree. I went into geometry here. So, well, let me just address the stuff in the debate. We can go back to the geometry thing. Let me look here. So I said, if there is a young Earth, then there's no evolution. So why then would God make it look like it evolved? And I don't think a lot of the answers by creationists are very satisfying, the ones I've heard. So I had to put forward my own, and I presented it a little bit tonight. So I'm just looking at my slideshow here. I'm gonna address that. So let's see if I could find, okay. I'm gonna slow down a little bit here. It's a philosophical detour. We see this pencil dipped in water and it looks bent. Does that mean God is being deceptive because he made it look like it's bent? I mean, do you see that this is not a scientific question? You know, why would God make it look bent? And we're going to say God's being deceptive. Do you see where I'm headed with this? If you don't, just bear with me. Or how about, okay, why don't I explain what happened? So it took thousands of years before we codified the answer. It was codified by Wilbur Snell in something to what we know as Snell's law, and it explains why the pencil looks bent. It's an optical illusion because water will refract it, and that explains why. So it's like, we could go down a philosophical detour and say, well, that's not good of God to make it look like it's bent. It's like, you know, that it doesn't change the fact that the pencil is straight. Why do we even have to raise the philosophical question, why did God do it that way? All right. It's like if I were, it's like, it's not a scientific argument saying that if I were God, I wouldn't do it that way. That's not a scientific argument. And so when you say, why would God do it that way? It's like, that's not a scientific argument. The implication is that, that doesn't make sense to me, why God would do it that way. Therefore, I don't believe God did it. And you could do the same thing with this pencil. It's like, well, I don't really, I'm going to believe that the pencil is bent, because if I were God, I wouldn't make that pencil look bent. Therefore, I'm going to believe that it actually is bent. And then, of course, I'll come along with Snell's law and say, hey, it's straight. And you can actually maybe poke a hole in the pencil here, or if you had a hollow rod, you would see that the rod is straight if you look down through it. So there are any number of ways to explain this, but appeals to saying that if I were God, I wouldn't do it that way, therefore it's this. That's not a scientific argument. Even more powerfully, the problem of geocentrism. Superficially, it may look like the Earth is the center of the universe. To the ancients, that was the case. Many of them thought the Earth was the center of the universe, and that the sun and other bodies orbited around the Earth. But even with that, it was problematic because you had things like the North Star suggesting that the Earth was rotating. Well, why am I pointing this out? There's a subtlety in the argument here that accords with evolutionary theory. They'll say, well, look at these ERVs and how similar they are, and look at the progression of forms in this fossil record, how similar, it looks like a progression of forms, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I would then say, look at geocentrism. They were able to predict the seasons of geocentrism. They were able to predict that the sun would set and rise every day. They probably had a system where the moon too, would also, do what it did. They had epicycle theories to explain what they call retrograde motion. And like, look at all these successful predictions of geocentrism. But what about where it failed? That's what I was trying to point out. Just because you have all these successful predictions doesn't mean your theory is true, especially when you have all these things where it doesn't agree with what we would predict from other theories like cellular biology and statistics and biochemistry, etc. It just doesn't add up. So you could still swear by your common ancestry, but as Michael Behe was pointing out, it doesn't mean that this evolves naturally. It doesn't evolve naturally. Meaning, we have in statistics what we call expected values, which we could kind of just roughly say, what we would expect to happen. So like if you have 500 fair coins and you shake it up in a bottle and you pour it out on the floor, you're not expecting it to be 500 coins heads. It violates expectation. By way of extension, that's why a tornado passing through a junkyard is not expected to make a 747. The randomizing action has effects on what you would expect to form and not form. And you can just extrapolate this then to what you would expect at abiogenesis and the forming of proteins, DNAs, RNAs, etc. And then also then the intricate connections in parts. So let me hold that thought about intricate connections in parts. I'm going to continue with this example of the geocentrism. So just because you have predictions that were fulfilled doesn't mean it's true, especially when you have all the predictions where it fails. Then it's not a theory. And they're testable predictions where it's going to fail. One of them is genetic deterioration, or what the creationists sometimes call genetic entropy. We will see if the biosphere is decaying in terms of genomic decay. And the opposing side was like not believing when I said Lenski showed that there was genetic decay. I specifically cited the paper 2017 by Cauchy and Lenski that said despite quote unquote fitness gains, the genome is decaying. The dominant mode, for all observed field observation and laboratory experiments in evolution, the majority, by far, mode of evolution is loss of complexity. And to my knowledge, we have not had any substantially new, like major protein families emerge. Just doesn't happen. And even if it did, it's overwhelmed by all the proteins we've lost, proteins/genes. So that leads to the question then, why would God make it look like it evolved? It's a good philosophical question, but I want to point out, just like geocentrism, we could say, well, why would God make it look like the universe is geocentric? It's like, well, no, he didn't. He only made it look that way superficially, but if you look at all the data, you realize the solar system is heliocentric and the Earth is not the center of the universe. It's not like God hasn't given us data to actually figure out what things are. So we could say, well, I'm going to believe that pencil is bent because I wouldn't expect God to make it look bent. I mean, it's a terrible argument. It's a terrible argument, especially when you have contrary data, such as Snell's law, that's going to explain that the pencil is straight. And then you could do other experiments where you have a hollow tube. You could actually see when it's put in the water that it actually isn't bent. And then for heliocentrism, there are a number of things that help us decide that. The first is the things like the North Star. You could see that it doesn't move. Therefore, we're not the center of the universe. At best, we are kind of in a cylinder on the cylindrical axis. The other things, you have things like the Coriolis force. The famous thing about when you flush your toilet, does the water swirl one way or the other, depending on your hemisphere? That's kind of a crude way of doing it. You can actually do this with artillery shells, projectiles. When I worked in the defense industry, we had to program the missiles to deal with the Coriolis force. Depending on what hemisphere you are, when you're trying to move straight, you're going to get kind of this fictitious force that pushes you to the side. Also at the equator, you have the centrifugal force. So you actually weigh a little less at the equator than you would at the North Pole. And then heliocentrism explains retrograde motion. The icing on the cake is the fact that we can navigate space probes around the solar system quite effectively. There are creationists involved in orbital mechanics. That's very good proof that we are not at the center of the universe as far as everything revolving around us. So again, we have to look at all the data, but then, there's still, I grant, there's a philosophical question. It's like, why would God do this? So some people said, well, God actually is letting it be deceptive. And they would cite 2 Thessalonians 2:11 through 12, where God actually sends delusional spirits so that people that have pleasure in unrighteousness will be damned. Some translations say that. It's just like, well, that's kind of hard to swallow. I'm going to put a different perspective on this. Why would God do this? And this is, again, Stephen Gould it bothers him. He said, did God create to mimic evolution and test our faith thereby? So the general thing is, we look so similar to chimpanzees. If God wanted us to disbelieve evolution, he wouldn't make chimpanzees because they look so similar to us. Then what creationists normally do is they'll say, well, we're not that similar. And I'm like, oh my goodness, don't say that. Do not say that. I do gene browsing. I could tell you, I've seen some of the proteins are 100% identical between us and chimpanzees. We are very, very similar to chimpanzees. And you can take all these creatures in the world and start to group them into families of the closest, kind of like a Venn diagram. That would suggest a family tree. You can't run away from the nested hierarchy. Now, it's not a perfect hierarchy, but you're still like, well, there's still a lot of hierarchy there. Okay, so even if you don't absolutely prove common ancestry, you're still confronted with the problem of nested hierarchies. Now, I think to correctly say this, there are actually multiple unresolvable hierarchies. And that's really deep into the weeds. And it still doesn't answer the question, why would God make any of those hierarchies anyway? Because it still feels a little bit like common descent. And my comeback is, all right, this is a philosophical, that's a philosophical question, and I'm going to give a philosophical answer. That means no experiment is going to solve this. And that is, shouldn't you be thankful every day, especially you Christians out there, that we can do medical experimentation on the embryonic stem cells of chimpanzees, the embryonic stem cells of aborted human fetuses? Think what a gift of God that is, that you can study medicine by studying bacteria, yeast, mice, what do they call it? Roundworms, nematodes, worms, mice, rats, chimpanzees, and pigs. What would be the alternative for us to do medicine if we didn't have these other creatures? We call them model organisms. Model organisms. So creationists, I'm just telling you, don't go down the path and say we're not that similar to chimps. It's not a very good argument. We're very similar to chimps relative to a tree. You take a human and a chimp, we're much more similar to a chimp than we are to a tree. And by way of extension, that means you can build all of these hierarchical groupings. And in most hierarchies, the chimp and human would be in the same group. You can't run away from that. And I'm saying this because I felt the creationist counter arguments to that problem of similarity was very, very weak. And it bothered me too. And I said, God, why are you being deceptive? I mean, I can accept that, but it's still unsatisfying until I began to study, and I had to do a class presentation on a particular, the tetrameric structure of a glutamate receptor or something like that. And the postdoctoral fellow that was assigned to me to help me work through this, I asked him, well, how do we figure this out? He said, we use stem cells. And my heart sank. I went home and looked it up. It was an embryonic stem cell from an aborted fetus. My heart sank. At that point, I realized, God, I'm really glad we have lab rats. Poor little innocent creatures, although I don't particularly care for rats. But if you've seen some of the experiments we do on rats, you'd almost feel sorry for them. The kind of cruelty we subject them to, we'll mutate their genomes and make them all look birth defected. We had some experiments with mice that I read about where they had them go through a maze and then they chop their head off and then just kind of look at their cells. It's pretty cruel, guys. Now, do you remember in the Old Testament, for you believers out there, that God is teaching us that our sins were paid for by the innocent Lamb of God, Jesus Christ? And the way that was done in the Old Testament was the animal sacrifices. You take this beautiful little sheep, it looks so innocent, and God's going to have you kill it, then you chop it up and you burn it up, and you're just like, wow. And anyone who's sensitive will be like, that's really sad. You feel so sorry for that innocent lamb dying for your sins. And it also says in the Bible, by his stripes we are healed. By his stripes we are healed. By the suffering of something innocent we are healed. You see, in the medical profession, we subject things like mice on our behalf so that we can find medical cures. It used to be we would sacrifice chimpanzees. And then there are all these ethical complaints saying that's inhumane. And they're like, well, yeah, that's cruel and inhumane. But then they're fine about aborting babies and then using their tissues for medical discovery. Do you not see there's a problem with that, guys? But the reason I'm pointing this out is that's why I think God made similarity. And it's really difficult to kind of explain, and I'm doing research in this area. We can actually do protein fold prediction. I'm just going to touch on this because this would be a 10-hour show. Direct coupling analysis. Let me see this. The patterns of similarity and diversity in the proteins can enable us to do even really cool scientific predictions. It facilitates it for the nerds out there. One example is direct coupling analysis. Use all the math like this monstrosity. You put in the amino acid sequences and you can do full prediction. And that's about all I'm going to say because it's just way too complicated. But the point is, the patterns of similarity and diversity are optimized by an intelligent designer. We would not be able to do all that complex math unless God ordained that we are similar to chimps in a certain way and different in just the right amounts. And same with us being slightly different enough in the plants, but similar enough. That math wouldn't work if God didn't make it that way. It's an uncanny pattern. So that was really what was on my heart to share with the creationists in particular, and then also say, evolution, it fails as a scientific theory, and now we also have reasons to explain the patterns of similarity and why we're grouped into families. It's optimized for medical discovery. So again, Stephen Gould's thing here, why did God create to mimic evolution and test our faith thereby? First off, it only superficially looks like we're evolved. The problem of complexity refutes evolution. And if the Earth is young, then there's no evolution at all. And let me just show. So I know we can have like this. Okay, just for completeness, we have a human zinc finger protein, and then we have the similar one, what we call a homolog in pigs. And yeah, they're like, well, that looks like it's evolved. But then I point out there's no common ancestor between zinc fingers and collagens or any other major protein families. So common descent is refuted in that example. But more to the point, see if I have it. See, this is an example of how we do medical research on humans. We use roundworms, we use squids, we use plants, we use yeast, we use bacteria, we use mice and chimp. All these things contribute to us understanding human beings. And thank God we can go from very simple bacteria all the way up to chimpanzees that are very similar to us. This is very, very helpful in doing medical research, and also that we can group them into families that way. This is a dissection of a fetal pig. This is a pig fetus. As I see this, it's like, shouldn't we thank God every day we don't have to do this on human fetuses to understand our biology? So that's why that's one reason I would say God made these creatures similar to us. Now, you don't have to accept my explanation, but I think it's a pretty good one, especially in light of all the protein work that I'm finding about things like direct coupling analysis. All right, so let me just try to keep going here. Just see some of the other notes. I mentioned in passing the decaying magnetic field. Even in Wikipedia says in 1600 years it's going to be gone. Therefore, eventually the ozone layer will be gone, which would start to kill lots of life, especially humans. And then the entire atmosphere will be gone because the magnetic field keeps the solar wind from hitting the atmosphere in large quantities, because if it did, the molecules of the atmosphere would reach escape velocity, and outside of the gravitational influence of the Earth, it would never come back. Our atmosphere would be gone. There'll be no more life. And I've been saying, civilization could be ending very quickly. This would suggest that at least life is young, therefore not evolved. Okay, so now Mark, and I think AJ, Atheist Jr., but definitely Mark, was saying, well, it doesn't have to be all at once. And he's saying that's a fallacy. Okay, so if you build a house of cards, both cards have to be simultaneously there for it to hold. You can't just gradually evolve a house of cards with random orientations. It has to be carefully positioned to work from the start. You can't go from something disorganized to something that organized. So we have examples. And he was correct to say, well, if I had said that all complexity can't evolve, if it's irreducible complex, which isn't an argument I made. Unfortunately, other creationists have made that argument. He would say, all you need is just one example and the whole theories fall apart. And I wanted to say, creationists, that's why you don't use the irreducible complexity argument as a total generalization or overriding law. Use it as what we call a heuristic. It's like, if something's irreducible complex, maybe it won't evolve naturally. You have to look at it a lot more carefully to make absolutely sure it's going to be very, very, very unlikely to evolve. And there's some things about that where they're saying it was refuted at Dover that it actually did evolve. And it's like, no, that's not true, because you have to use circular reasoning, and I can't get in there. That's a whole nother discussion that's almost not worth it anymore, because we have better examples than the bacterial flagellum, like say the eukaryotic transport. I mean, they're just way more. So where was I? So okay, the house of cards, and I know now. What I wanted to show was the connectivity problem. Let's see, connectivity. Hang on, guys. I'll show you just how hard it is to connect. And okay, so this is from Bruce Alberts, and I showed this in my debate. I'll elaborate on it more. On the left side is one hypothetical protein, and on the right, in the darker green, is another. They are shaped to be able to connect to each other. And it may not look like it, but the connection of the protein is even more precise than this nut and bolt. The connections have to be more precise than that nut and bolt. And one of the reasons, and I mentioned this in the debate, the charge distributions on the proteins have to be positioned correctly. So that, like, say, a negative charge on one is positioned to be attracted to a positive charge on the other. So opposites attract. And this is how proteins that are just floating around in the cell, for lack of a better word, I'll use the word Brownian motion kind of figuratively. It's just bumping around, but they're able to partner with the right partner. Opposites attract, but then they're properly shaped, so that the charge distributions will allow them to find their partner even in a random soup. The difficulty of doing this is beyond our technology. If you had to do this from scratch, it is so hard to do this. If the way we're able to build the proteins, the way you make proteins is through spelling, and that's another story. So let me show you some pictures also. Okay, so this picture was in 2 dimensions. I'll show you the 3 dimensions. So this is just a kid's toy here. It's a kid's puzzle, and you can make all the parts fit. If you randomly, say, alter the shape, dare I say mutate, it's going to be a worse and worse fit until it won't. So that's why most random mutation results are detrimental. Now let me show a real protein here, at least the Richardson ribbon representation. This is the EZH2 protein. This is the EZH2 protein. It's complicated, but you could see how everything has to connect just right to make it have that particular shape. And that's not the end of it. Oh, but by the way, doesn't that look a little bit like the kids' three-dimensional puzzle? This is how precise it has to be. Random mutation doesn't make these nice, precise connections. This is the EZH2 protein that's part of the polycomb repressive complex. And speaking of which, here's the polycomb repressive complex. The EZH2 is in here, and then it has to connect to all these other things. And then that connects to the DNA and the histone tails. It's just amazing. This just does not arise randomly. Oh, yes, and Mr. Jetty pointed out there is a SAL protein right here. That's a SAL domain right there. It's not a protein, it's a SAL domain within the EZH2 protein. So this block diagram is the entire EZH2, and it has various domains, and one of them's named after me. Isn't that cute? So I think I have some other diagrams I wanted to show, see if I could find it in the meantime. And, oh, this is funny. That's a picture of Ian Juby. He had one on genetic entropy. That's so funny. Anyway, I'm going to pull up, let's see, I had a picture on, it was the zinc fingers. Let's see if I have one. Okay, I'm going to bring up my presentation on zinc fingers. Okay, so where was I? I was going to show the zinc finger proteins. Ah, yes, because they mentioned ERVs. Let me see if I could find a diagram of the ERV. And I mentioned this in the debate, and it absolutely flew over everyone's head. And that's just because people don't study this. I can't blame them for not studying it, but everything put in the creation evolution controversy, it's on the terms of the evolutionists. And then the creationists will generally come back and just kind of nitpick and say, well, you know, that's not proven. It's like, no, you have to go at it from another angle. And I got to point out, there's a creationist in the channel that doesn't like me, and he was just trash talking me, and he knows who he is. And I just want to tell him that he can go wrestle at Dinosaur Adventureland with Chris Jones. You know who you are. I didn't appreciate what you did tonight, dude. That wasn't cool. So I have it here. So I mentioned the zinc finger cap1 complex. So let's see it here. So this is the endogenous retrovirus right here. There is a zinc finger protein that connects to it right there. The zinc finger connects to the cap1 protein. And again, you need all these precise connections there. And I said, that's the first problem. This is very important. And then Schnoil just mentioned the Sternberg-Collins paradox. And I'm just going to point this out. Maybe I'll put it in the side chat. Because it's complicated. They'll say, why is it just that way in that creature, you know, in a chimpanzee and then also in a human? That violates the odds. I'd say common design. Common design, especially if the Earth is young, is best explained by, you have only common design. It's not by common descent. As a matter of principle, it has to be common design. What is the evidence that it's common design rather than randomly? And that's the Sternberg-Collins paradox. And I'm just going to put it in the chat. Any serious student of this And the ID proponents and creationists alike said this is actually pretty good. And Mark said, well, people don't respect Sternberg. I'm just like, well, yeah, because he dissented. He has 2 PhDs, one in, I think, in systems biology and the other in evolutionary biologist. He's an evolutionary biologist. He was calling this out. And now that they reject him, it's like he's not respected. And I countered, I had a chance to counter. He said, you know, most evolutionary biologists don't agree with you. You know, he's saying most evolutionary biologists don't agree with you, or Sternberg, who was an evolutionary, he still is an evolutionary biologist. They don't agree with you. And that, you know, I just had that moment of inspiration. I basically said, I don't care, because evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom in science's pecking order, far closer to the pseudoscience of phrenology than the physics. And I really darn well meant it. You look at the top research teams that study cellular biology, that are trying to pioneer medical cures, that are advancing biotechnology. Their teams are made of biochemists, cellular biologists, computational biologists, computer scientists, physicists, mathematicians. The last skill set that they want is an evolutionary biologist, because they're at the bottom of the barrel as far as their value. What can they do? Just make phylogenetic diagrams, say this evolved from that, and they're even then they're not sure. How does that help us understand how things are connected? And so, yeah, that was, you gave me an opening right there. I just had to say, hey, they don't matter. They really don't. They are not respected. I mean, you know, everyone else, all the scientists may say we believe in evolution, it's well established, but internally, when it comes to the money, you know, put your money where your mouth is, they don't pay evolutionary biologists to help with research. It's the biochemists, it's the cellular biologists, the experimentalists, not the people that can do phylogenetic diagrams. I'm sorry that's harsh, but that's just the truth. So here it is, the Sternberg-Collins paradox. I named it after Sternberg, and Mark Reed had pointed out, well, Collins believes in evolution. And I wanted to say, look at this article. Collins actually pointed out a problem in evolutionary biology, probably without meaning to. So I'm going to dump this in the side chat. And I really don't want to disrespect Mark. He's just like the sweetest guy, and I have no problem with him as a person. Same for AJ. This is not meant as an attack on him. There's certainly people I totally despise on the internet, and I wouldn't be so nice. And I probably will never debate them, because they're just such people I just find very, I just can't stand them. But I put Mark in the category of just being a great guy, and I'm sorry we had to disagree. Seems like he's a great guy. Same for AJ. I would sooner hang out with these guys than some creationists who will not be named. I wouldn't want to hang out with them. They can go to Dinosaur Adventureland and wrestle with Chris Jones. That's how I feel about some of my fellow creationists. I don't have good feelings about them. They've stabbed me in the back, said negative things, and it's like, okay, 2 people can play that game, and you made your bed, and now you gotta lie in it, and you gotta lie in it with Chris Jones. So anyway, thank you for the kind words about the Sternberg-Collins paradox. Someone did mention more 4D manifolds, because someone said, what is time? Just like, okay, don't get me started. Just look up the time problem in Wikipedia. Time is separate from space. This whole thing about chromosome 2 fusion, proving evolution, some creationists think, as Eric pointed out, that maybe chromosome 2 did get fused in one of our ancestors. And it just proves that it got fused. It's not proof of evolution. Stupid horror energy, my favorite stupid horror energy. She said one mutation makes a topoisomerase from an endonuclease. I'm just like, you got to be kidding. They may say that. I'd like to see the paper. So, you know, in her or his or her defense, you know, I didn't read the paper. Miss Energy, if you do have the reference, you can put it in the comment section. I'd be grateful. I don't know how you can, unfortunately, because I'd have to make you a moderator, and I'm fine with that. So maybe if you make a comment and say, hey, Sal, make me a moderator, I'll make you a moderator, and then maybe you can post in the comment section the link. So until you get moderator privileges, unfortunately, YouTube's going to just zap all the links. You just have to text me there. That's all I could say. So there were just some things here that I realized the hard way, and Amy Newman pointed out, if you mention someone on the other side by name, you're giving them an opportunity to respond. So I'll be more careful next time. There's just an administrative thing. If you saw me looking left and right, I have 4 monitors in front of me. And so I was furiously typing here as I was listening to what they're saying, typing, making observations, Googling just a little bit. I was typing stuff to cover in the after show. Someone said Sal is not an ID proponent. I can understand why they say that. I said, I don't consider intelligent design as science. I take a lot of flack for that. I said, just don't make the argument. I don't care what you call it. The important thing is you need intelligent design. Whether you label it science or not, doesn't matter. I've said, just don't label it science. Stop giving the other side an opportunity to just change the subject. You're going to spend a whole hour or a whole day or months arguing over whether intelligent design is science or not, and you don't start criticizing evolutionary theory and exploring the complexities of the cell. As it says in Psalms, declare the Lord's work. I will declare the works of the Lord. When you get in these definitional arguments, you're not doing that, and you're not doing what will really help you in this debate, and you are spending less time declaring the works of God. So I am an ID proponent. I just say that I don't personally believe I would classify ID as science. I believe it's true. I believe history is true, but history doesn't mean history. Just because history is true is necessarily science. There was a huge bit of time spent on arguing what a species is. And I've said, don't argue with that. Dr. Dan took a class on species in graduate school. Dr. Dan's an evolutionary biologist. At the end of the class, the graduate students, the professors, none of them could agree what species are. So why do you think we're ever going to settle it in a debate? Not even evolutionary biologists can agree on the species. And I like what Dr. Dan said, species are fake. So don't go there. You want to criticize common ancestry, the best proof would be young fossil record, young Earth. Barring that, accept common ancestry or old Earth creationism. Dr. Fuzz Rana is an old Earth creationist. So you can have like these little explosions of creation, and then it diversifies. Now that looks kind of funny, but I still think it works better than universal common ancestry. So that's why I say, don't fight over universal common ancestry. It's going to be too complicated, and it will get you into criticizing evolutionary biology rather than declaring the works of God. All right. So we talked about the Sternberg-Collins paradox. Sandy Pigeon was there, my friend. Thank you. I want to just thank everyone for bearing with some of my earlier audio problems. I hope you've been able to hear me clearly today. Some reason when I'm on these multiple streams, something about the audio goes crazy. I think there could be feedback in people's microphones and it causes me to be muffled. If they all muted themselves, I may not have that problem. To circumvent it, I need to talk a little more into the mouthpiece here, which I can't even see. There might be a little hole there, and that kind of helps. So I have to kind of look kind of like this, and I could talk and they can hear me. But I wanted to thank everyone for their forbearance. So I'm almost done. I talked about, okay, so they're talking about dogs and wolves, and I'm just like, oh, please, no. Uh, all right, that's just about it. So I'd like to thank everyone who joined me for this after show. I'd like to thank everyone who saw the debate. God bless you. People that saw it in both live and in recording, and then also this after show likewise. Thank you very, very much. It's been a long day. I'm not going to be quite as active on this channel for a while, just because people know that a lot's going on in my life. I'm in the middle of a lawsuit against my church, and I'm in the middle of writing a book. I'm renovating the house, trying to stand up side business, just all sorts of things going on. I also have a huge backlog on scientific publications. The good news is the editors are accepting our work, and it's moving forward. And it really is. I feel incredibly blessed to be a creationist who can publish in the secular venues. So love you all. Thank you all who've been a part of this channel. Some of you know that it was a really hard last year. After my mother went home to be with the Lord, you all here have been an important part of my healing process. So with that, I'm going to try to close out by playing my usual closeout music, and that is the Rachmaninoff. Just give me a moment here, and I'm going to load it up. By the way, I hope you enjoyed seeing that video of the jetpack and the paramotor gliders. I think that's just really cool. So now we'll just finish off with Sergei Rachmaninoff's 18th variation on a theme of Paganini. Take care, and God richly bless you.